You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Spanners Ready, and we're just days away from the second test, and I can see our downloads and our viewing figures are starting to ramp up again for the new season. So I just wanted to say thank you, a very special thank you to everyone that has consumed our content in the off-season and interacted with us and kept us going through those dark, pointless non-F1 weeks. We don't have a fancy advertising budget, but we do have you. Wherever you discuss F1, please subtly drop in that all the cool Formula One gang are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. Tell them to go to missedapex.net. I'm joined, of course, by Matt Trumpets. Good evening, Matt.
And good evening to you as well.
I listened to all the tech time segment that you did with Summers.
Oh, you mean the extra hour and 20 minutes we recorded after the 30 minutes we recorded for the regular show?
I will be releasing that on the Patreon feed today. I definitely didn't forget to do it this morning, but it's always good value. But no one's here for you. No one's here for your tech. We are here to speak to a man that has been at the actual helm of a Formula One team, a man who was the CEO of Lotus F1, who stood toe-to-toe with Cyril Abiteboul in hotel lobbies, a man that looked at the 2014 Twin Tusk and went, yeah, that'll definitely work. It's ex-F1 boss and Formula E E-Prix Vancouver E-Prix promoter, Matthew Carter. Welcome back, Matthew.
Thank you very much.
It's been a while, but you've been busy organising an actual FIA race.
I have, and I still am. Yes. So I've moved location as well. So I'm now in Vancouver.
So you've gone from Montreal all the way to basically Alaska.
It's something like that, yes.
and everything's going well with that. It's all happening. They've not changed their mind.
No, currently nobody's changed their mind. It's all going well. We're selling lots of tickets, and I think we're currently we've sold more than 30,000 tickets, which is quite good for a Formula E event. There should be lots of fun things happening over the weekend.
Yeah, because you're making it a festival of Formula E, a Canadian festival, rather than just turn up and watch a race.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a 2-day business conference. Then on the Friday, we'll have a celebrity race and an esports tournament. And then Friday night, a concert. And then the Formula E race itself on the Saturday.
So who's racing in your celebrity race? Do we know yet?
Yes, so they're all Canadians. You probably won't have heard of many of them. So there's a couple of guys from a TV show called SEAL Team. There's a guy from Letterkenny called Andrew Hare, Jason Priestley. There's one of the most acclaimed female ice hockey players called Hayley Wickenheiser. There's a couple of Olympians, Charmaine Crooks, and a guy called Alex Bilodeau, who won the first gold here in Vancouver for Canada. An MMA heavyweight world champion. So a big fighting guy. There's a whole raft of different people. There's a couple of slots still available. But
awesome. So what are you putting them in to race?
So they are racing in a car called a Solo. So it's a car that's made here in Vancouver by a company called Electromechanica, and it is a 3-wheel, 2 wheels at the front, 1 wheel at the back, little electric vehicle. So should make for some good racing. It's called a Solo because it's a 1-seat, so it's a commuter vehicle.
Oh, brilliant. So go and search for, what is it, Canadian eFest to go and find more details of that?
Yeah, CanadianEFest.com. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dip into our mailbag, because we do love to just pick your brain for your expertise, Matthew. And here's something that you might know about is driver talent. Of course, you would have been responsible for hiring and firing the odd driver at Lotus F1. And we've had an email here from Anderson. And Anderson says, quick comment, one flawed premise in discussions around drivers is that, and this is the flawed premise, that drivers either have an innate talent or not, whereas in fact, performance is dynamic and drivers can improve or worsen over time. Anyway, awesome topic and super interesting conversation always. Thank you very much, Anderson. This is when we were picking between our which driver we're supporting in each driver battle. But do you have an opinion on whether there's, some people are born fast, or do you see people evolve into roles in different cars?
Crikey, that's quite a loaded question, isn't it? I think that they are born. I think you're generally born with. So a lot of what makes racing drivers is reaction time, and I think that you can learn that to a certain extent. But I think there's some natural talent that you're born with, and I think it's just a case of sort of honing that natural talent over your career. Can you get worse as you get older? Yeah, I think absolutely you can.
You can get worse, but can you get better? Because if you look at, say, for example, Stroll and him getting those tests in the old Williams, for example, and then having had a lot of time to develop in Formula One, like there's a clear improvement. Like he's gotten pretty much. I personally think so. I think he's gone from you've got no business being here to competent number 2.
Okay. Yes, I guess you can hone your skills to a certain extent, but I don't think with all of the practice and the training in the world, he's ever going to
be top,
be on the same level as a Charles Leclerc or dare I say it, Max Verstappen.
Do you get to see more behind the scenes when you're at testing and at simulators? And in fact, how useful is the simulator for assessing any driver talent? Of course, there was drama when you were at Lotus, wasn't there, with simulators and test drivers falling out? There was a Danish. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the simulators are a good tool. I mean, honestly, we use the simulator more to set up the vehicle than to sort of gauge how good a driver was.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, and it's again, people often think that the simulators, the drivers use it to learn the track. Well, they didn't in my day. It was more to set up the car and to get the car in a place that we felt comfortable with, and then to correlate that to the track when we got there.
Oh, okay. So I don't think many people are like super aware of that, to be honest. I think people think of the simulator as a place where one of the reserve drivers can kind of show their mettle and show what they can do.
No.
Well, okay.
So I mean, Kimi Räikkönen famously never went in the simulator because it made him feel sick. Roman and Pasta would very, very occasionally come and use a simulator. We had Nico Prost was our simulator driver for a big chunk of the time, and he would just go in there. And as I say, it would be all about setup. So they would be, looking at wing angles and suspension ride heights and yaw angles and all those good fun things.
And how much did that relate? Like if you made a change in the simulator, would you see it on track?
Well, our simulator was actually very, very good because it was the remnants of when Renault owned Enstone. So it's one of the last things that they put in was an upgraded simulator. So ours was very good. I think back in 14 and 15, it was considered to be one of the better ones in the field. So we were pretty good. Our correlation was generally pretty good. So it was just our drivers that needed that.
Okay. Well, let's move on to some stuff that's a bit more current. In fact, we've got another bit of listener feedback. We are getting a lot better because of Kovox, not Kovacs, like I said on Sunday. Because of Kovox, our Dutch email provider, Tom has very kindly actually gone in and sorted it out for me so that all your emails go into a nice folder that even I can go and find them. So do go and check out, particularly if you're in the Netherlands, kovox.nl. If you want an email solution, link in the show notes below. Matt, put the link in the show notes below. But we have Robert, who is echoing a lot of sentiment from people in the F1 community about the Russian Grand Prix. So the Russian Grand Prix has been cancelled, not just the Grand Prix, but the actual contract has been cancelled as well. And he is suggesting a Ukrainian Grand Prix, not in Ukraine, but a kind of a dummy Ukrainian Grand Prix, perhaps at the Nürburgring in Germany. Not only will that give us a German venue, but it will be a fitting replacement for the Russian Grand Prix. I'm not sure how feasible and practical that is, but it seemed like a difficult call for the FIA, Matthew, to really pull the trigger and go, no, not only are we not going this year, not only is it definitely cancelled, but it's actually the contract with the promoter itself is done. So that's no Sochi and no whatever the replacement was.
Yeah, no, it's a big call. I mean, I don't know how deeply you want to get into the political wranglings on this show.
Medium's fine.
I think, I think it's a big call, but I think it's probably, in my opinion, the right call. And I think what Haas has done is also probably the right thing to do. To have another Grand Prix in Germany and call it Ukraine. I mean, yes, by all means. I mean, logistically, I don't think it'd be that difficult. I mean, you just have to, you take that slot that was Sochi and you just have to drop another one in. The only potential issues could be weather, I guess, and location.
Well, the question that I had sort of wanted to ask you, especially now that you're working with the FIA in a promoter capacity as well, is how will they evaluate potential venues to replace Sochi? Will they be simply looking logistically at the closest tracks, or will they perhaps range wider afield in their search?
The honest answer is I don't know. They obviously have to go to circuits that are graded good enough or of a high enough caliber to host an F1 race, which I know we discussed this previously, but during COVID, they obviously managed to find a few extra racetracks like Portimao and some other racetracks that weren't necessarily up to speed, and they brought them up to speed. So, as I say, I think they will look at that gap in the calendar. They'll assess. They obviously wouldn't want to go somewhere where they would have issues with weather. So they want to look for somewhere where the climate works. And then it's just a case of, I mean, they're not adverse to flying from Monaco to Montreal one weekend after the other. So I don't think the geography will play a big part in it. It'll be more to make sure that they get a venue that suits, a venue that's going to pay some money, because that'll be important, because Sochi was one of the, or Russia was one of the big ones. It was one of the ones that paid a big fee. So I guess they need to fill that gap somewhere in their profit line. So yeah, I think they'll take all those things into consideration and then pick a venue.
Yeah, so it's not just the FIA who are having to deal with a drop in revenue and profit, and it always seems a little bit trivial to boil these things down to, well, how does it affect a race car team? But it is, after all, an F1 show. So, of course, Haas being sponsored by E-Prix, was that the name of Mazepin's? E-Prix. So it's Mazepin's father's company. I don't know anything about that, but clearly they felt that was problematic, did Haas, and so they've dropped Mazepin as a driver. Do you think that was a big decision? Because there was an interview with Gunther Steiner who said that he didn't think that Mazepin grasped how untenable his situation was and was like fighting to stay in the team. And it occurred to me that's probably the first time Nikita Mazepin's heard the word no. That for one thing. But a massive blow to Haas from a sporting point of view.
Yes and no. I think it was inevitable that they had to make that call. Once they'd made the call, I mean, I think Nikita's father was one of the 5 people that Putin invited over before the troubles broke out, and so I think it was untenable that they were going to stick with him, and therefore, Nikita's not going to stay there if they pull out. And it's not as if he, with the greatest of respect, it's not as if he set the world on fire over the last couple of seasons to make it impossible for them to keep him. For Haas themselves, it's obviously going to, again, the dirty word of money, but it's obviously going to leave a little bit of a hole in their budget. But my understanding is that through a mixture of drivers and engines and things, they're going to be able to plug the gap and probably from a sporting point of view, be in a better position.
Who would fit into that gap, Matt?
Well, this is the very question I was going to ask Mr. Carter. We've heard some names. Obviously, a lot of people will be very excited to see Piastri in that seat. He's the Alpine reserve driver, I think. There are other people's, Giovinazzi, for example, but you also mentioned engines because they are a Ferrari customer right now. Are we giving a little away with that suggestion?
I don't think I'm giving anything away. I thought that we were pretty nailed on as to the replacement. So from what I understand, Fittipaldi is going to do the first few races. and it's in his contract that he has an option in the event that there is no driver there, and that option comes with a payment. So that's going to generate a chunk of cash for Haas. And then I'm pretty sure that Giovinazzi is going to be the one that steps in.
Really?
And it's going to be dealt with by Ferrari in terms of there's going to be a big holiday on their engine payments.
Oh, okay. Well, that's the first I've heard of that. I didn't know if that was circulating. I really thought it was just going to be Fittipaldi. How does that work? So why would they not just bring...
So, from my understanding, Fittipaldi is on a similar kind of deal, and a lot of third drivers are, that I had Jolyon Palmer on, and that is that they pay a chunk of money to be the third driver, and then if a seat becomes available, there's an option for them to jump in, but that option has got a price tag attached to it. So Haas are needing to fill a hole, and I think there's an amount that he will pay to represent them in testing, and then another amount he will pay to represent them in a race.
But he's got that option.
From a purely financial point of view, I think that it would be which is also Fittipaldi would be great for them for their American sponsors, and in terms of the name and all of those great things. So I think he's going to step in for a short period, whether it is just testing or whether it actually spills into the start of the season. And then Giovinazzi is going to extricate himself from his Formula E contract with Ferrari's backing, and
right.
And there'll be some sort of financial incentive from Ferrari to Haas and the engines.
So that is super interesting. So if this had happened before they'd announced their driver lineup for 2022, they could have just gone for Giovinazzi. But because Fittipaldi's in there with this third driver contract, I guess what's the point in being a third driver if you're not the go-to substitute? Yeah. That's really interesting. And so from what I can gather, people aren't particularly excited about Fittipaldi from a talent point of view. So we'd expect him to slot in behind Schumacher. But if Giovinazzi's there alongside Mick Schumacher, I mean, that's an actual Giovinazzi's a kind of a known-ish quantity. That represents a much more interesting challenge for Mick Schumacher to show what he can do than going up against Mazepin again.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said when you asked the question, I think from a sporting point of view, I think they're probably better off. From a money budget point of view, it's going to be difficult. But again, these decisions have got big ramifications for the sport. So, Liberty, for sure, Liberty will help out as well. There'll be some assistance from Liberty, there'll be assistance from Ferrari, and I think that they'll be able to plug the gaps.
Real quick then, I've seen that I believe it was Jenna Fryer got hold of Gene Haas himself, and he made it very clear that Haas has always been the main sponsor of the team, and that Ucrali was in fact the title sponsor. How hard do you think it will be for them to nail down a new title sponsor at this point in the season? Is it even a possibility based on your experience?
It's a possibility. This close to the start of the season or even into the season, it's always a possibility that you can get sponsors, whether you call it a title sponsor or just a normal sponsor. But generally, there's obviously a discount because of the amount of visibility that sponsor's going to get on the run up to the season. Even if they sign someone now, would they be able to get it on the car for the first race, for the first test? So it makes it a little bit difficult, but certainly not impossible. And I think with the eyeballs that are currently on F1 following the end of the season and Drive to Survive and all that stuff, then there's certainly sponsors out there that are prepared. I mean, you look at some of the deals that Red Bull have announced over the last month or so. There's an awful lot of money milling around that people are willing to throw into the pots of some of these teams.
Can I be nosy? Because, hang on, let me word this delicately. Not based specifically on your experience, but if you had to guess what Fittipaldi might be paying to be a third driver with that reserve kind of caveating, because that's actually, it's worked out to be a good deal. It's done exactly like the best case scenario for Fittipaldi. So paying to be the third driver and then the payment to take up the option. Do we have a kind of a ballpark to give people an idea? If you had to guess,
I mean, I can give you a ballpark going back to 2014, 2015. So a third driver would be somewhere in the region of 3 or 4 million euros. And then the jump from there into a drive purely depends on the negotiations that we've done at the time. I think the figures have been thrown around reasonably loosely and publicly. So Pasta's backers, Pasta's sponsors, PDVSA, were paying $30 million.
30
for him to race for us, for Lotus back in the day. And there needs to be something that is going to make the team want to put him in the car. So it really comes down to negotiations. I mean, the cost cap, for sure, that's helping, because you can contribute a little bit more to that. But I would say it will be in the late single-digit millions.
Right. So I just looked up Mazepin net worth, and it's coming up as like $1.3 billion. So for them to put their kid into Haas F1 team was like, it changed down the back of the sofa. It was like nothing to them. Yeah. So that tells you that this wasn't just purely a money issue. They have made like a call with Formula One. They've made an active decision, which it's not controversial. Like, I'm more than happy with it. But normally with these things, it is the national teams or flying the colours that is sanctioned. Whereas here, it's gone against an athlete, which is somewhat rarer. I don't think the maybe Matt can shed some light on that, but it's not. The FIA haven't said, "Oh, Mazepin, we don't want you." Like, on the surface, Haas have made that call.
Haas have made that call. The FIA had the option of banning athletes altogether, following the lead of the international the International Olympic Committee, because they've been recognized as an Olympic sport. Motorsports has. They chose not to do that, but what they have required of Russian drivers is, I believe, a signatory to an agreement, either a behavior agreement or I'm not clear as to what it was. And I don't believe Mazepin was willing to sign it. And I believe I've also read that Kvyat has not signed it, which means that should his number get called for any reason, wherever he's whoever he's backing up, he will not be able to race unless he does.
I also think it was probably I was going to say a matter of time. I'm not sure if that's correct, but so I know that Nikita wouldn't have been able to drive in the British Grand Prix because David Richards came out and said that no Russian athletes would be allowed to compete. So that would have been problematic. And who knows what other sporting associations would have followed that lead? You could then end up in some kind of bizarre situation where you would only be physically allowed to drive in a certain number of races.
I'd seen people raise visa concerns too, for example, traveling issues as well about a Russian passport.
Okay. We've got a good question here from the Patreon Live Slack. Hello, Patreon Live Slack, and it's Daz, our resident gardening expert. It says, driver salaries are outside of the cost cap, so are driver contributions also outside of the cost cap? So no, I believe no. So if the cost cap's 200 million and you've already got 200 million, I guess there's no benefit to taking a pay driver except that you're saving that. Oh, you can make a profit. Money. Oh, I see. Yeah.
So the two sponsors that Red Bull announced, whenever it was last month, I'm not totally sure I agree with Christian and his numbers, but if you take him at face value, just those two sponsors are bringing 150 million a year into the team, and the cost cap's 146 or 148. So those two sponsors are covering their whole cost cap. Now, again, it's not quite as simplistic as that because they just gave Max a $50 million a year salary, so that's outside of the cost cap. So, but those sort of figures, when you band them around, it suddenly makes, and that's why the cost cap is interesting. It suddenly makes potentially a team profitable.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even thinking about that. There's the reason I'm dirt poor. I wasn't even thinking, oh yeah, they just get to make more money. I wasn't even thinking about that. But yeah, so okay, and so for Red Bull, I guess it is chump change anyway, because we were talking about it or speculating on Sunday that salary for Max Verstappen being the same as Hamilton is probably quite what do you call it?
Statement.
Yes, a statement rather than that's a specific value that they went for. But again, if you look at Red Bull's profits, it's not a matter of, what can we afford to pay Max? It's what should we pay Max?
Yeah, exactly. And also, they need to give him a bit of an incentive because he's not a terrible car this year.
Now then, I guess that brings us to our next area of speculation. And for you, it's a little bit more than speculation because you have a much better Rolodex than I do. We've got 2 rumours, really, floating around that I'll make it 3. A is that Red Bull invested everything in 2021 and left a little 2022 on the table. And the other one is that the rumour going around is that Mercedes are going to turn up to Bahrain with basically no side pods. And Scarbs F1 did a really good sketch of the Mercedes without any side pods. There was barely any side pods in Barcelona, to be fair. But starting with Red Bull, since you brought that up, the car's overweight, it's heavy, and from an engineering design perspective, in my experience, things like missiles and anything that needs to be light, where that's an advantage, they start off big and chunky, and then as the models and iterations go along, they get lighter and lighter. So a heavy car from Red Bull suggests that there are a few iterations behind.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think if you look at the field a little bit more broadly, I think probably Ferrari are the ones that are in, from a development point of view, I think they're probably the ones that are in the best position just because they really pulled off of last year and focused on their 2022 efforts. Mercedes, from my understanding, there was a big chunk in the middle of the season, or towards the back end of the season, where they put all their efforts onto 2022 and they then re-engaged with a couple of races to go. But they, if you take that at face value again, then they're fairly advanced in their life cycle for 2022. Red Bull, again, is my understanding that they literally were throwing everything at last season to get it done. So I think it would be safe to assume that they're a little bit behind. The rest of them, I don't know. McLaren could be a dark horse. Their performance did seem to tail off a bit last year, which maybe sort of signifies that they were focused a little bit on 2022. Alpine are going to be terrible because they are just going to continue down that route. And I think that's it for the front runners, isn't it, more or less?
Trumpets, did you feel the pain in his voice there, sympathising with Alpine?
Yeah, well, I think their new latest CEO, team principal dude, probably agrees with that assessment, and hopefully we'll talk about a little bit more about that. But what I'd heard that was interesting was that of all the teams that showed up to the first test, which was all of them, only Sauber, Alfa Romeo, had actually met the minimum weight. But even they are happy with, I believe it's the rumored 5 kilogram increase, bringing it up to 800 even, because their floors kept on breaking. So something about this new formula is making it difficult for the teams to make the minimum weight without things breaking. So it's going to be an advantage for the teams that were lighter because they'll just have more ballast to move around and handling.
Yeah. I mean, F1 teams are always going to push the absolute boundaries of what they can and they can't achieve. And now testing or whatever they called the other week, a shakedown or whatever it was.
The test.
That is that's designed to break things on the car. Basically, they want to push the cars to the limit, and then when they break, they know that they've gone past that limit. So yeah, I mean, lighter cars are obviously going to be better, and as you rightly say, they can move the ballast around. But you know, with such a big rule change, the testing was all about pushing things to the limit. It was all about making sure that the cars could run, that they would go round. The next test is when they'll start to focus in a little bit more on performance. And that's just how it works.
Yeah. Now, one of the teams that we didn't talk a lot about in our testing review was Alpine. And that's because, well, you know, we wanted to talk to you about it.
Mr. Carter, come on now. Be civil.
I don't know. I'm being facetious.
Aside from the fact their DRS didn't work and they burned the car up on Friday. Thanks, Fernando.
Well, he's 50. Come on.
I know. He's almost as old as me. So I'm surprised he can even, you know, drive it the correct direction on the track. That's a joke. What I want to ask you about is there was a really interesting interview with Laurent Rossi, who is now in charge of the team. And he identified sort of some larger areas of concern for them and areas where he felt like they were, I don't know, not maximizing what they might get from the partnership with Viry in particular. And he focused very much on the differentiation of being a works team, the chassis and power unit integration. In your experience, do you think he's got the right of this here? I mean, he's gotten rid of a lot of people. Do you think he's on the right track long term to actually improve the performance of this team finally?
I think bringing Otmar in there is going to help. I think his background and his technical knowledge and his ability to run a race team is going to help them a lot. I think that'll focus them more. Do I think they're on the right track? Potentially, yeah. But they're always very, very good at tripping over their own feet. The integration with Viry was always, I mean, we weren't a works team, obviously, but that integration was always key to it working, and it always was difficult. And the fact that they're the only team running that engine now, I think presents a bunch of problems for them as well. I mean, they've got by a magnitude of however many teams, less data to look at and to go on. So I think that puts them at a disadvantage from the off.
So aside from Cyril, what made the integration with Viry so challenging from your point of view?
Apart from Cyril.
So Enstone is very English-centric. Viry is very French in its operation, in its outlook, in its way of working, in its communications, in its just everything. And Enstone is very, very English. It's an English team. It's an English base. Now, my understanding is there's a few more people that move between the two, but certainly back in the Lotus days, we were very much Enstone and Viry was very much Viry. Never the twain really spoke or met or could push things forward. And I think Red Bull had the same issue. I think Red Bull very much had the same issue. I think they felt that it was difficult to get Viry to do what they wanted them to do and to push them in the way they wanted to push them. So they made the decision to go with Honda. So I don't know. I mean, the potential is there. Don't get me wrong with Alpine. The potential with the Enstone outfit is there. As I said just now, the simulator is very good. Their wind tunnel is again one of the better wind tunnels on the grid. They've got some great people there. They've got a good driver and a Spanish one.
You went the wrong way. You went the wrong way.
Even I felt that.
2 championships. Ocon struggled against Perez.
2 championships when? Were you even born when he was jumping?
Yes. Well, maybe, yeah, it's quite close. But, Ocon was soundly beaten by Perez in their seasons together. So, Oh, look, Matt just woke up.
I'm laughing because the chat is already anticipating me. You mentioned that Renault is the only supplies Alpine now. But we've also heard talk about Andretti coming in. Do you think it's realistic? Because they've got a split compressor now. They finally got a power unit that meets the minimum weight after how many years? 7.
Yeah.
Do you think it's possible that they might find a willing customer in the future? And could that customer potentially be Andretti if they wind up coming into the sport?
I mean, it's a perpetual question, isn't it? Because if their engine is better, they will find a team, and that's just common sense. So if their engine improves, then they're going to find a team. If their engine doesn't improve, then nobody's going to want to go with them. They're going to stick to Mercedes and Ferrari. There are certain links, and again, in sort of the opposite of what I said just now. But teams like Haas and McLaren have no real loyalty to go with a particular engine manufacturer. The Haas deal, as far as I know, is finished with Ferrari now, so they're free to choose if they want to go with a different engine supplier. So if Renault really makes some great strides forward, then they'll find more teams. And a team coming into the sport, as a team coming into the sport, why would you pick a Renault engine right now? Again, it's a dirty word, but I guess you would base it on money. But back in the day, and I don't know whether it's changed now, I remember asking Cyril for a big discount so that we didn't go to Mercedes. And his argument back then, and a lot of Cyril's arguments weren't necessarily well formed or well put together, but his argument back then was that the cost of making the engines meant that it was almost not worth him supplying engines to other people.
Okay, but now that's surely not the case.
I'm sure it's come down because of just over time they will learn more about this. Back in the day, the physical cost of making the engines was so prohibitive. His, as I say, not particularly well-reasoned argument was that the more teams he supplied, it would actually end up costing him money, so he wouldn't discount the engine.
So my view and my assumption, limited manufacturing experience, would be that once you've designed it, actually just churning them off, you want to sell more because
exactly.
Okay, so maybe that's more the case now. But if you are going to go to Renault, if you're Haas, you can get a big discount at Ferrari by having Schumacher and Giovinazzi in your team. Is there that similar kind of ambition with Renault Alpine? Like, will they take on is there a Renault Junior? The F2 champion, perhaps, but
Piastri.
Okay, maybe I've just answered my own question then. But, do they have that kind of advantage with Ferrari? It's a big team. You're in a big system of drivers.
Again, without being too disparaging, I think you underestimate the difference between Ferrari as a brand and as a motor racing bloodline and France, and it's very different. For Ferrari, having an Italian driver on the grid is huge, and they will go all out to make that happen. Mercedes, to a similar extent, Mercedes like to have their junior drivers, and they like to have a good lineage and as many as possible, because they realise that maybe George Russell's going to work, maybe where Pascal Wehrlein didn't work, or maybe Ocon will bring himself back around because he's still under the Mercedes management. They believe in having a number of these young superstars because some of them might, not make it. And Ferrari tend to do that with their Italians. Do Renault do that? Not really. I think they're more focused on the brand Alpine at the moment.
EJ in the chat is suggesting that perhaps Lundgaard and Joe are technically Renault drivers, although I don't know how much that would apply to Joe. I don't know how academies work, so I'm way out of my depth here. But let's move along the team line. I saw a report, I think in therace.com, where they said that a lot of teams were considering AlphaTauri to be a little bit of a dark horse this season, and their true pace was shadowed a little bit by not being able to run on the final day in Barcelona. But I do wonder with AlphaTauri, if they're a dark horse, if they turn up and they do really well, what is your understanding of the relationship between they are a B team to Red Bull? Is there any restrictions on how good they're allowed to be? If they're that close, why aren't they better? And what would happen if AlphaTauri just suddenly turned up with a concept that had them fourth and Red Bull fifth?
It would very quickly end up on the Red Bull.
Oh, they just take it.
They won't be allowed. No, in my opinion, they won't be allowed to beat Red Bull. They will be, on the same weekend in the same circumstances. Then Red Bull will always be ahead.
But my follow-up to that then would be, if it's that easy to just take the concept that AlphaTauri managed to get and put it on the Red Bull, why don't Red Bull make AlphaTauri better? Last season they were deploying both drivers, so it was Hamilton versus 4 Red Bull drivers at one point. Like, why don't they just make AlphaTauri better so they're right up there with them? Can't they, or can they?
Listen, I'm a great one for making things oversimplistic, but that is very oversimplistic. So there's a chunk of listed parts that they can't, so you can't, once you go down a route, it is difficult. My point being that if the designers for AlphaTauri do come up with something ingenious, the designers at Red Bull will know about it before it goes on the car, when it's on the car, and they'll already be keeping an eye on it to see whether or not it's something that they should work into the Red Bull design. The same as I guarantee, the cars, I know a lot of people have said this, so I'm not saying anything new. The cars that turn up in Bahrain are going to be different to the cars that were in Barcelona, and the cars that turn up for the first race, even though it's only a few days afterwards, again, will probably be different. And a lot of designers will be looking at a lot of the cars as soon as they came out of the garages, and they'll be frantically working away in CFD and back in their factories to try and see if they can get any of these solutions to the problems that they found and make them work. I think it's super interesting, the whole ground effect. I mean, and I'm not an expert at all, but the whole ground effect thing is super interesting, and the way that the teams have approached it, I think it's going to be fascinating to see which way they go.
So I wonder how much they can do between now and the second test. So, for example, if your twin tusk worked or didn't work, how quickly can you abandon it? On the nose, a little bit easier. But for example, Ferrari, who've got like a inverted cheese grater, which I think is going to collect water. But if they, everyone is looking at that going, oh, that's interesting. But if they looked at the data and went, oh, that's fully rubbish, that. Like, can they just change the whole tub and turn up with completely different chassis?
I mean, again, you kind of underestimate how much of that they've already done. So CFD is computational fluid dynamics. That is the thing that's the computer system that all the F1 teams use, and they very, very rigorously use that before they even get to the wind tunnel with a 60% model. So they know pretty much how these things are going to work. My point is more that if someone has come up with a clever solution, aka a twin tusked nose. And I know that lots of other teams looked at that in 2014 to see whether or not it would work. Yeah, I've spoken to team principals afterwards, and a lot went back to see whether or not we'd actually come up with something. And funnily enough, to change that nose wasn't quite as simple as some of the things,
wasn't it?
Because you have to crash test. So they changed the rules from 13 to 14. Do you remember in 13 there was like a step in the nose because they wanted to bring I think there was some concern about T-boning cars hitting them side on, so they were trying to bring the noses down, and then they hated the step look. Yeah. So they came up with this other rule that meant that the front piece of the nose had to be lower, and it was very difficult to get those noses through the crash test, the FIA crash test. So it took us a lot of time to get the twin tusk thing through, and then it took us quite a lot of time to get the shorter nose one through that we did towards the end of the season.
Okay, I know, Matt, you have a very interesting question from the live chat. But before we do that, I just want to inform people of this very important message.
This coming weekend on the 12th of March, it's the M4EM Nürburgring 12-hour race on iRacing. This is an event that we've been planning for quite some time, and it's going to have 60 teams, including several entered by Missed Apex with some of your favourite panellists like Spanners, Matt Trumpets, Kyle Power and Alex Van Gien, all competing for trophies, prize money and glory around the best track in the world, the Nürburgring Nordschleife. We have a mixture of professional sim racing teams, as well as some real-world Nürburgring specialist teams, and a whole host of amateur drivers, and action is absolutely guaranteed. So search for Sim Broadcasts on YouTube. We're live from 9 a.m. UK time, Saturday 12th of March.
Yep, so Matt and I will be racing in that. It's the Nordschleife, which is like an 8-minute lap, and it's an endurance event, 12 hours this Saturday. I tell you what, Matt, I have been driving around that track. It is as hard and as horrible as everyone describes, and I'm not very good at it.
Yes, well, I was going to say, for some of us, it's an 8-minute lap.
Yeah, I'm taking considerably longer, plus the time towing back to the pits. But check out me and Matt's social media, Facebook page, Missed Apex Podcast, at Spanners Ready and at MattPT55. And we'll be sharing links to that on Saturday, so you can come and check out how badly we're doing there. But Matt, I believe there was a question about less hellish, nightmarish tracks.
The question actually was about the changes and whether or not we might hear from your friend Phil again about the track changes at Melbourne and Saudi, and even perhaps get an opinion on the new Miami circuit that we're going to be seeing this season.
Yeah, of course, we can line that up. There's no problem at all. Yeah. He's busy building the track for us here in Vancouver, but yeah, we can definitely get him on.
Are you saying that you don't want to halt the work of the Vancouver E-Prix just so that Phil can come and chat with us? Get your priorities straight. Come on, Mr. Carter.
I mean, that being said, he's not physically doing it himself, but he's overseeing everything that's going on. But yeah, no, we can definitely.
Do you know anything about the changes? You guys must have chatted the changes going on for the Australian Grand Prix. Will we notice?
No, we've not really talked about it, to be perfectly honest. But I think some of them were pretty much overdue. It's difficult. I mean, with all these things, getting the changes, it's getting it past the FIA and their sporting department. Basically, is one of the big issues that you have to try and make things a bit more exciting. But yeah, I think it'll make it a better race. I think it's going to be a great race, actually.
So that's a good point. Like you're designing basically a track from scratch, and you're the mean suit that everybody's got to go and make proposals to. How much input have you had, like personally, on the layout of the track? Nothing.
Zero.
Okay, but no emotional investment in whether there should be more hairpins or more chicanes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, emotional investment, but nobody listens to me because I don't know what I'm talking about. But I mean, the track that Phil's designed here in Vancouver looks really good. I mean, there's some. I think we spoke about this before. There's some slight differences with Formula E because you do need to have some heavy braking so they can generate some of the battery energy. But aside from that, no, I think he's designed a great track here. We've specifically made sure that it's has as limited impact on the city as possible. So we're only actually closing a couple of roads, 2 roads.
Oh, okay.
So that's another thing you obviously have to bear in mind. But yeah, no, it'll be a good track here.
I hope you focused on viewing points. The only E-Prix I've gone to was Battersea, and it was like they went out of their way to make sure you couldn't see the track unless you were specifically exactly where they wanted you to be.
Well, I like to think that, I mean, Phil worked in F1 for a long time and has designed a few Formula E tracks. Obviously, I went to all the races for 3 years. As Bernie said to me back in the day, he said, "You've been to all of the races, you know what works and what doesn't work." So I like to think that we've picked up a few hints and tips along the way, and we're putting them all into. Don't forget, this is the first event. Vancouver E-Prix is the first event that we as OSS have done from scratch as our own. You know, Phil's done lots working for other people, but this is the first one that he's done for his own company. And so, yeah, I think we've put all of our years of learning into this track and the experience in general. So in terms of viewing points, we've got, well, you can see it on the website. There's a ton of great grandstands and a ton of great areas. We've got a little stadium section, aka a kind of like a Mexico sort of area where there's big grandstands, and there's a little chicane and a 90-degree turn, and there's an outdoor stage going to be in that area as well. So have you
got the EJ, the not the DJ, the EJ? No,
he's done? No longer. He doesn't come with Formula anymore. We do have a DJ, which we haven't announced yet, but we're having a DJ on Saturday.
You can tell us; it's fine. No, it's off season. No one's listening. It's fine. No, okay, Matt.
Well, I was just going to humble brag that it helps if you have access to a VIP grandstand when you're viewing these sorts of things.
Jos Capito said to Planet F1, and I don't know how reliable a source that is, that the departure from Williams was very sudden and difficult. And has that transition fully taken place now? Like, are they fully free? I don't want to make it sound like it's a bad thing, but obviously they're still carrying the Williams name. I had sort of assumed that the transition was a little bit less black and white than that, but the picture they've painted there is that it was just a traumatic wrenching away from the F1 team.
What was a dramatic wrenching away?
The change of management between the Williams family and Doralton.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's any change like that is a big change. When we went from Lotus to Renault, or vice versa, from when they went from Renault to Lotus in the first place, it's always going to be a big change. And you can't underestimate how much people have, how much individual nuance and individual input people want to have on an F1 team. So everyone's got their own ideas of what they should and shouldn't be doing. Everyone's got their own ideas of what's going to work. And I think it's, you try and make your mark and you try and put a stamp on things, and it's going to be different. And it had been in the Williams family for such a long time that people get stuck in a rut's not the right way to word it, but they go along the path, and they're just used to doing things the way they do things. So any change is going to be a big wrench. Personally, I think it's probably for the better. I think that the team had, and this is no slight on Claire at all, but I think the team had started to go a little bit stale. So I think some new blood was well needed.
How much of that do you really think just came down to a lack of funding? It's been a personal pet hypothesis of mine that they suffered for quite some time, probably even by the time they got to 2014, because they sold off advanced engineering. It just seems like somewhere there was a business deal that went bad that just sucked money out of the team, and that they had ideas, but those ideas just got put into drawers because no one could afford to actually test them or make them a reality, because the team really stagnated from that point on.
I think there's a lot of truth in that. I think they didn't necessarily evolve with the times. They did some crazy deals. They took Unilever from us at Lotus, and Unilever were paying us $11.8 million a year, and Williams offered them exactly the same exposure for $4. So they ran around and they were grabbing sponsors. I think there were potentially some money issues. I also think there was some sort of inbuilt issues from the past. I think that they still felt that they were a big team. They still acted as if they were a big team, and they didn't necessarily have the money or the know-how at the very, very top to see that through. And I think it's difficult to underestimate that. But I think a lot of this is how we've always done it, therefore this is how we're going to do it kind of attitude, linked with not having all the resources that they could have had. That being said, Bernie always looked after them. Bernie really looked after them. They got an extra payment. I think it was called a historic payment. They got over and above the other team.
So was that just it's because I like you, so I'll write in this historic payment?
Yeah.
Okay.
And he said that. He literally said in meetings with me that it was a historic payment because it was Frank. And Ferrari got their payment because they're Ferrari. It was, they were literally, it was, and Toto and Christian and all the others hated it. They hated those facts.
I bet. And look, Bernie Ecclestone's comments are becoming increasingly ignorable. Well, no, I don't think it's even controversial anymore. It's got to the point where he's just not. I don't think he's in the conversation anymore. He sort of just takes himself out of it. I'm pointing to very specific recent comments that I might have retweeted or shared at Spanners Ready on Twitter. But it's interesting to know that he was like literally playing favourites with the sport, and like. So that's not a controversial conspiracy theory. He's literally going, I like you more, so here's more money. So Williams, Ferrari, any others? I mean, who knows how far that extended? Did that extend to rules? Did that extend to stewards' decisions?
Ferrari have got their veto. I don't know if it's still in place. But back in 2014-15, Ferrari were allowed to veto any decision that was made.
Amazing.
They had it was called the Ferrari veto. It was written into the strategy group rules that they could veto something. And they could go away and think about it for 48 hours and then come back and veto it. So we would have a day-long meeting, which was tedious beyond belief. You'd vote on something at the end of it, and you still knew that Stefano at the start and whoever it was that took over after him could potentially go back to Maranello, and someone could shout at them, and then they'd come back and say, no, we don't agree with that.
See, Trumpets, if you say now in modern F1, say something like, oh, well, the stewards are so friendly with the certain drivers that they travel with them to races, or the...
I sense this bus being driven down 6th Avenue. Go ahead.
Or that certain team strategists have a relationship with certain decision makers within F1.
Sorry, you call that 6th Avenue. Go ahead.
You'd call that a mad conspiracy, but we've got Mr. Carter here literally playing out that scenario from as recently as like 8 years ago.
Well, I'm remembering a story, I believe he told us, about a fuel sample getting poured out once upon a time by a very well-known Bernie.
Does someone want to remind new listeners what that was?
It was a story I heard from... It was a story that Ron Dennis told me that this was back in the day. This must have been in 80s, 90s, I don't know. But all the teams felt that Ferrari were running some trick fuel, and the FIA went and requested a sample from them, and they took it to Bernie, and Ron was in the room. He saw it happen, and Bernie apparently just took the sample and pulled it out the window.
Yeah.
And so we don't want to look into that. It's going to cause controversy.
Yeah, and at the time, I bet that would have been considered a mad conspiracy theory. Trumpets.
Go
on, Carter.
Sorry, I was just going to say, just to sort of finish on the Williams and the extra payments and things. I agree with you, and I tend to agree with what you said about Bernie in his current state. But I think back then, he was doing things for the right reasons, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think, we could be here all day going backwards and forwards and arguing whether or not Ferrari needs F1 or F1 needs Ferrari.
Okay, let's do that. That's the rest of the show. No, I'm kidding.
Age-old debate that gets thrown around. But I think that by giving them extra money to stay in F1 at the times that he was doing it probably was a good thing, and probably was a good thing for the sport. Is it a good thing for the sport to encourage a traditional manufacturer like Williams that have been there for a long, long time, or to help them or to give them a helping hand? Probably is the right thing to do. Did it upset some of the other teams? Yeah, but then Mercedes managed to write in. They changed it so that you could get an extra payment if you won a certain number of constructors champions.
Oh.
Not drivers championships, constructors championships. That's the important one. We all know that.
Check out who listens.
depending on the number of constructors, then there was an extra payment for Mercedes, and Red Bull obviously qualified for that as well by winning those 4 on the bounce. So I think it's it goes around, comes around. It's just different ways of running the sport. I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, and I think if Bernie had been in charge, would we have all these races in the Middle East? I absolutely don't think so. Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi, and Abu Dhabi. It's 4 races that all take place in the Middle East now, plus the testing that takes place there. It's very Middle East centric. Why is that? Because there's a ton of cash there that they're being paid. And Bernie was always one for, yes, obviously he was one for taking cash, but he also wanted to make sure that it was a world championship, and that it was very well spread, and that it didn't go to to the same country more than once. So Liberty, not only have they gone for those 4 races in the Middle East, they've also got 2 in the US now. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It's just a different way of approaching it. Like you can say it's a different way of, everything that happened in Abu Dhabi. And, we're certainly not going to go down that route. But, it's the whole drive to survive thing, and the way that the sport is going, and the way that Liberty are driving the sport, is it becoming more entertainment than sport?
Yeah. Well, it depends. I mean, you'll have had your eyes on that FIA report. What does it say? I know they've not released it yet. What does it say? They should release it, shouldn't they?
So it's that age old. I don't know. I mean, it's good for the sport to have more people watching. Whatever anyone says. Are some of the diehard fans going to fall out with it? Maybe they are. I don't know. It's we're certainly not going to solve that issue today.
No, we're not. And in a striking departure, I have 2 questions for you that are so completely unrelated, I can't ask them as one.
Yep.
So,
my
first one, and these are short questions, is just based on our last discussion, it suddenly occurred to me, we've not asked you a kind of important one, which is, now, how much do you think, not Larry personally, because I don't think he's going to miss him at all, but how much do you think Aston is going to miss having Otmar in charge? I know everyone says good things about Mike Crack, who is coming in to run the team.
Michael Crack, come on, man. Michael Crack.
I've been waiting so long to say those 2 words in a row, but yes. Indeed, how much do you think you're going to miss Otmar in Aston?
I think they're going to miss him a great deal. I don't think that Lawrence Stroll thinks that, but that is more endemic of his approach to life. And I think it's fascinating that Otmar didn't have to do a gardening leave or anything, that he literally just went and wanted. That is so unheard of in F1, because he was there. He knows exactly what Aston were doing. I think, again, it just speaks of Lawrence Stroll's sort of arrogance, I guess, to a certain extent, to say, there's no one person that's going to be bigger than us. So, go off. If you get another job, then by all means start. And he walked straight to the door at Alpine. I think it will affect the team. I think, I've heard good things about Michael as well. But it's different doing it in F1. It's a whole different beast, and a lot of people come from outside and they sometimes struggle to find their feet to start with. But I think looking at people like Seidel at McLaren has probably helped Lawrence to say, look, I can look from other disciplines and bring them in. I think Aston have got a whole world of issues, and I think Otmar probably did the right thing to jump. Not sure if he landed in the right place. I'm not sure if he went from the frying pan to the fire, but we'll see, I'm sure.
And the other one, and we sort of tangentially already discussed this, was the Andretti entry, which seems to have been it seems to be a very serious bid. But then you run into the buzzsaw of only the top 10 teams get the payout. Yeah. Do you think F1 is financially going to be in a position that they can fix it? I mean, and do you think the Andretti entry would be a good thing for the sport in general? Because then we'd have more teams and we have payouts. Or do you think F1 could fix it so that that extra team could also get a payout that might help it?
Yeah, I think Andretti would be a great thing for the sport. And honestly, I mean, having been there and lived through it, I still don't really understand the reason that they only play the top 10 teams. So for clarity, it is only one of the two pots. So one of the pots is the promoter money, and one of the pots is the TV broadcast money. And I can't remember which one, but one of them is evenly split, and the other one is split 10 ways. So there is some money that comes, but it's certainly not enough to warrant staying in the sport. Yes, I think they should split it more ways. I think more teams, the better. But again, it's a throwback to Bernie, and he wanted it to be elite, and he wanted it to be, the best 20 drivers in the world, and it's the best of the best, and only those that can put up the most money and that can bring in the best drivers are going to survive. But no, from a personal point of view, I think honestly, the more teams, the more drivers, the better.
Okay, I think we're short for time. You have a 10 o'clock. I also have a 10 o'clock. I'm also important and speak to people. I'm not setting up a race or anything, but if you want to see Mr. Carter's efforts at setting up a race, go and search for Canadian E-Fest online, where you can find out stuff and still get tickets, I assume, as well. There's still some availability for that. There's got to be, hasn't it? It's 4 months away.
Yeah.
You can still get a ticket for that.
Actually, one of our grandstands is sold out already.
Well, be quick. Be quick then. Link in the show notes below. We'll let Janet have the quick final question. What do you think about the animosity between Horner and Wolff? And I think the implication is, is it real or is it staged? I've got the feeling that it's very real. They seem to dislike each other. I believe it.
Yeah, I do too. I think it's there's a lot. I was going to say there's a lot of pressure, but that's stating the absolute obvious. But you also have to factor in the travel, the flying around the world, the number of people that they've got back at base that are rooting for them, and they are very different characters as well. I think I've said this before. They're very, very different characters. Christian can be for want of a better word, a wind-up merch, and I think he's. And I sometimes think that for a long time Toto could just rise above it because it didn't really affect him, and Christian used Cyril for his to pick on. And I think now that they're fighting, I think there's genuine animosity. They're never going to go out for a beer with each other, I don't think, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think I want to go for a beer with Christian.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I feel like we've learned something there.
Yeah. This is subtle hints, isn't it? We've been very subtle on this show. I think.
I think there's ways of winning things, and there's a degree of humility sometimes when you win things, and then there's the Red Bull way.
Well, what a note to end on. Go and follow Matt at MattPT55. You can follow me at SpannersReady. But most importantly, go and check out all the Canadian E-Prix stuff. Mr. Carter, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you'll come and drop in and give us an opinion once we've seen some cars driving in anger.
Sounds good. Yeah, will do.
Excellent. This has been Missed Apex Podcast. Send your friends to go and check us out at missedapex.net, where they'll have a choice of video and audio to pick from. The next show will be Sunday night. It will be a review of the second test, which is Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I think, and we'll actually get to see cars on track on telly, which will be very exciting. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.